In this video, I'm going to show you how to do a chi-squared test for a 2 by 2. So when you have a 2 by 2 table, like you've got 2 rows, 2 columns, you need to do a thing called a Yates correction. And the Yates correction kind of involves this extra step here where you've got the minus 0.5. So it's similar to the other one, but there's just a little extra step that you need to do. So if your table is a 2 by 2, you need to make sure you do this correction as well, or else your process won't be considered correct. Rightio, so first of all, to do it, you need to copy and paste your data. So I'll do one for GDP and CO2 per capita. So copy your data into a new sheet. Oops, here we go. There we go. And now what you need to do is you need to sort your data into high-low and high-low. So what I mean by that, for example, we need to have a category for low GDP and high GDP, and low CO2 and high CO2, because we're going to make this 2 by 2 table eventually. Okay, so to start with, there's different ways you can sort it. You can just look at your data and go, okay, looking at those numbers, I think high GDP is above 5,000, and I think low GDP is below 5,000. And you might look at this and say, I think high CO2 is above 3 and low CO2 is below 3. That's okay to do that. You can also do calculations to try to work it out. Like you could find the median of each column and use that to separate them, or find the average of each column and use that to separate it. So for example, if you were to use a median, I'll do an example for you. Equals, so you go equals MED, double click on the word median and select the numbers that you want the median for. So selecting my GDP, close brackets, enter. You might just want to keep a record of that. That's median X, or median GDP. Now let's find the median CO2. To do that, go, I'll scroll up a bit. To do that, you're going to go click in the cell, that should say median, equals MED, double click on the word median, select the CO2 values this time. Again, don't select the titles. Close brackets, enter. So if you look at this and you were to use that to decide what your boundaries are, you could say, for example, I think that you might say low GDP and high GDP could be sorted in this way. So let's see, let's close that, high GDP. So looking at the median, if that's 8,700, maybe low GDP is below 8,500, for example, or below 9,000, whatever you decide it to be, or 8,000. And therefore high GDP would be above 8,500. You would also then have to come up with categories for your CO2. So low CO2, for example, and high CO2. So looking at this, if the median's 2.55 and so on, maybe low CO2 is below 2.5, and I can say high CO2 is above 2.5. So again, it's up to you how you make up your categories. And what you need to do now is use these categories to kind of rank these. So this country here, we don't know what country it is, but it doesn't matter at this point. So you've just got to decide, is it high GDP, high CO2, is it low GDP, high CO2, and so on, using the categories that you've come up with. So looking at this 962, that's low GDP because it's below 8,500, and 0.03 CO2 is in the low because it's below 2.5. So it's up to you how you do this. This is just your own way to do it. I'm going to call that low. So I'm going to type in the letter for GDP first, because that's the first column, and the second column letter represents CO2. So the next one, as you can see, is 5305 and 0.99. That's another low, and so on. And then this one's high GDP per capita and high CO2 using my categories. This is another low. This one's another high because it's above 8,500 and above 2.5. It's another high. So you just have to do this really carefully. It's just coincidence minor turning out high highs and low lows. You can also get high lows and low highs and that kind of thing as well. which when I go through and fill this in, I will get some like that. That's high, high. This one is an example of a low high, because see, it's below, the GDP is below 8,500, but the CO2 is above 2.5. This one's a high, 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 and so on. And I'll just pause this at this point because this is quite boring for you. So, okay, I'll do that. Rightio, so rather than bore you and go through all that and make you watch it all, I've actually filled it all in now. So I'll pause the video and filled it all in. What you need to do now is you're going to make this table over here. But to do that, you need to sort the data first. So to sort the data, what's a lot easier, rather than count up how many low lows you've got, you can sort the data, select C, like column C, select it all, and go to sort and filter in the top right, and sort A to Z. Make sure this thing is selected and go sort. So see what it's done is it's put all the high highs together, it's put all the high lows together, all the low highs and all the low lows together. So I'll just skip ahead to one that's been sorted for you already. So now you might want to pause the video and you might want to set up your little table like this, because this is where I'm going to count up all my high highs, all my high lows, and eventually to do the chi-squared calculation, I'm going to do that in this table over here. So see, low GDP, low CO2 is this cell. Low GDP, high CO2 is this cell, and so on. So you might want to pause at this point. So, and make up these tables. So assuming that you've done that, now I'll show you how I fill it in. So low, low, well actually I'll do high, high first because that's the first ones I've got here. High GDP, high CO2. So a quick way, and notice I should delete these because imagine you haven't filled them in yet. So high highs, just select all the high highs, and if you look down the bottom, it tells you how many you've got. So I've got 21 high highs. So in the high, high box, I'm going to fill in 21. Next ones we've got are the high lows. Notice I've only got 4 of those. So that's high GDP, low CO2. So just make sure you put it in the right one. And then low highs, select that, there's only 4 of them. And that's low GDP, high CO2. So again, just be really careful you fill in the correct box. And the last one is all the low lows. Low lows, let's select them all. You can see down here I've got 21. So low lows goes in the low low box. And then what we have to calculate here is the column, the row total. So 21 plus 4 is 25. 4 plus 21 is 25. Now let's do the column totals. 21 and 4 is 25. 4 and 21 is 25. And down here goes the total. So I've got 50 countries. So that makes sense. 25 plus 25 is 50, and 25 plus 25 is 50. So that should be the case. So you know there's been an error if that doesn't happen. Make sure to save your work as you go too. And it's a complete coincidence that I came up with 21, 4, 4, 21. Don't expect that yours is going to come up like that. It's not wrong if it comes up like this, but it's weird. So don't think that's the case, that they have to be the same number and symmetrical like that. So up here, FO stands for our observed frequencies. So low GDP, low CO2, just make sure you look at the right box. Low GDP, low CO2, that's 21. So we're just filling in the numbers from that table, the red numbers. Low GDP, high CO2, so let's see, low GDP, high CO2, there's 4. So type in 4. High GDP, low CO2, high GDP, low CO2, there's 4. And high GDP, high CO2, that's this box here, there's 21. So just make sure you fill that in correctly. And so on. And by the way, the table kind of extends over here, so you also need this last column here if you didn't see that already. So you might want to pause and add that one in. And that's where the total of this column is how you get your chi-squared value. These are called the expected frequencies, so we calculate those using these totals here. So it's always the row total multiplied by the column total divided by the total total. So we can do that using Excel formulas. We can click go equals. Low GDP, low CO2 is this box here, so its column total is, its row total is 25. Multiply, so do the star, by its column total, which is 25. divide by its total, which is 50. Enter. Low GDP, high CO2, so remember go equals. Low GDP, high CO2, its row total is 25. Its column total is 25, so do times 25. Divide by the total. High GDP, low CO2, type equals first. High GDP, low CO2 is here, so its row total is 25. Its column total, 2 times, is 25. Divide by total. So you have to do these all manually because they're all different numbers. Equals high GDP, high CO2, 25 by 25. Divide by total equals that. So it's a complete coincidence that mine all came up to be the same number. It's because of the way my numbers are distributed, like 21, 4, 4, 21. Most of the time these won't come up to be the same number, so don't worry if yours don't come up to be the same number. And now we just start to do simple calculations like FO minus FE. You can just go equals, click on your FO, type minus FE, enter. Remember, you can hover and make this different cross down the bottom and scroll down. And that makes sense. That minus that is that minus that is that, and so on. Now this next column, these funny symbols mean the absolute value. So they just mean whatever these numbers are, turn them into a positive. So you can just type in 8.5, 8.5, 8.5. Or you can go equals ABS for absolute value. Double click on abs and select the number, just the single number. Close bracket, enter. And then you can scroll down and see it's turned any number that was negative here, it's turned into a positive. That's what absolute value means. This one's easy, it's just the previous column minus 0.5. So equals, click on your previous column, type minus 0.5, enter. And you can scroll down and my numbers make sense, just check the numbers make sense. This one is just the previous one squared, so that's easy enough. Go equals, click on the previous one, then you do the upward hat 2, make square. Press enter, and again scroll down. There we go. And this last one is the previous column, divide by the FE. So go equals, click on your previous column, then do the forward slash for divide, and FE is over here. So select FE, enter. And again, just scroll down. Don't scroll down 5, just scroll down 4. That's it. And because this one down the bottom is the chi-squared value, it's the sum of all of these. So go equals SUM for sum, and select the 4 numbers that you want the sum for, and close the brackets and go enter. That makes sense. All of these numbers added together probably is 20.48. And I made that bold and red because it's an important value. It's my chi-squared value. So now we've just got to interpret this result. So luckily we've got our chi-squared value. We need to interpret the result. So if it's a 2 by 2 table, remember degrees of freedom. You might want to type in degrees of freedom, just a little reminder, equals the rows minus 1 multiplied by the columns minus 1. And we've got 2 rows, so 2 minus 1, close brackets, multiplied by the number of columns minus 1. We've got 2 columns this time. So where I'm getting that from is this table. See, it's 2 by 2. That's where I'm getting these 2 from. 2 minus 1 times 2 minus 1 equals just 1. So we have 1 degree of freedom. And we've got to select a significance level. We can either select, just one second. So in terms of significance level, we can either select a 10% significance level, a 5%, or a 1%. And it's totally up to you. You might do a 1%, you might do a 5%, you might do a 10%. So you make your decision, i.e., for example, in this one, I chose 10% significance level. So just record that so you can look back and remember what you did. 10% significance level. And the critical value is what we now need to read off the table. So we've got 1 degree of freedom. I randomly chose 10% significance level. So I could have chosen 5 or 1, that's fine. So 1 degree of freedom, 10% significance level. That's 2.71 is my critical value. So 2.71 is what I type in as my critical value. 2.71. So just looking out of interest, if I had chosen 5% significance level, then 3.84 would be my critical value. If I chose a 1% significance level, then 6.63 would have been my critical value. And remember now we compare our chi-squared value to our critical value. And our critical value is 2.71, our chi-squared value is 20.48. Our chi-squared value is greater. So you might want to make a little note of this. 20.48 is greater than 2.71. So if your chi-squared value is greater than the critical value, then the two variables are dependent. GDP and CO2 are dependent. If it turned out that your chi-squared value was lower than the critical value, then they're independent. So if your chi-squared value wins against the critical, dependent. If the chi-squared value loses against the critical, independent. So that's basically your chi-squared test. An important thing to go back and note is, when you first do this FE, just check, are all your values above 5? If it's a 2 by 2 table, all of these FE values have to be above 5. So notice I'm okay because all of mine were above 5. If you've got a single one that's below 5, then something's gone wrong and you should stop at that point, like don't fill in the rest of the table. You need to go back and you need to adjust these boundaries. So like for example, if there weren't enough high CO2s and low GDPs, then maybe I need to adjust the boundary so I can have more in the high CO2 and low GDPs. Like I could, for example, make low GDP be something like, where is it? I've lost it again. Make low GDP be something like up to 8,000. And to make low CO2, because we wanted this to be more low GDPs. So to make more low GDPs, maybe I want to make the boundary higher for low GDP. Make it up to 10,000 or 9,000 and so on. But you only do that if you have any values here that are less than 5. If they're all above 5, you're fine. Your boundaries are okay. But if any of them are below 5, you need to stop once you've done this column. Like don't do the rest of it and go back and adjust your boundaries so that you can get more numbers in here. And that's basically your chi-squared test. So make sure to save this work, and of course you're going to have to type it up nicely and explain all this in sentences and words in your IA. At least this is a way that you can do part of the process by hand on Excel.